Close your eyes if you have to. Unless you're driving, of course.
Right. Keep your eyes on the road.
Yeah, please do. But I want you to conjure up the image of an altar. And I don't mean a nice, polished wooden table in a modern church sanctuary with a lace tablecloth and a brass cross. I mean an altar in the ancient world, 1st century.
Whether you are Jewish in Jerusalem or a pagan in Rome, the image is the exact same. It is a place of visceral finality. It is, frankly, a place of death.
It's a slaughterhouse.
That is the part we tend to sanitize in our modern reading. You bring a bull, you bring a goat or a dove, you slit its throat, you drain the blood, you burn the flesh, the smoke rises, the god, whether Yahweh in the temple or Jupiter on the Capitoline Hill, is appeased, and you go home. The essential defining characteristic of a sacrifice is that it is dead. It has ceased to be.
And then you crack open the letter to the Romans, chapter 12, verse 1. You're reading along, you've been through 11 chapters of just dense, heavy theology, and then Paul drops a phrase that should honestly make your brain short-circuit. He calls for a living sacrifice.
It is a complete oxymoron. It's like saying dry water or bright darkness. In the religious economy of the 1st century, if a sacrifice is still living, the ritual hasn't happened yet.
You haven't finished the job.
Exactly. The knife hasn't fallen. But Paul takes this concept, which everyone understood as a singular moment of death, and he turns it into a perpetual state of being.
He is suggesting that the new Christian worship isn't about dying on an altar. It's about climbing onto the altar and staying alive while you're there, which, let's be honest, sounds significantly more terrifying than the alternative.
It is terrifying. And it's radical. It's not just a nice metaphor for trying really hard or volunteering at the soup kitchen. It is a liturgical relocation of your entire existence. You are the offering. And unlike a dead bull, a living sacrifice can crawl off the altar. It has agency. So the act of worship is the daily, hourly decision to stay there.
To remain offered. That is the paradox we are wrestling with today. We are jumping into what might be the most famous pivot point in the entire New Testament. This is Theology Brain. Chapter by chapter, we are taking the stack of commentaries, the Greek text, and the theological heavyweights, and we are breaking down the moment where theology becomes biography. We were tackling Romans chapter 12.
This is the moment where the rubber meets the road. We've spent 11 chapters in the absolute stratosphere of theology, predestination, justification, the history of Israel, the depths of God's wisdom, and now we hit the imperative.
The mission for this deep dive is exactly that. Moving from the indicative, what God did, to the imperative, what we do. And we have 3 heavy hitters guiding us through the text today. We've got Douglas Moo, Thomas Schreiner, and Beverly Roberts Gaventa.
A fascinating trio. You have 2 varied flavors of Reformed theology in Moo and Schreiner, who often agree but have distinct nuances, and then one apocalyptic powerhouse in Gaventa. It's going to be a really good fight.
Let's unpack the architecture first. Yeah. We cannot talk about Romans 12 without talking about the very first word, or at least the conjunction that kicks it off, the therefore.
The Greek word out.
Out. It's a tiny word, but it is carrying a massive amount of structural weight. It's the hinge of the whole book, isn't it?
It is the hinge of the entire epistle. If you imagine Romans as a mountain range, chapters 1 through 11 are Mount Everest. You have the total depravity of man, the righteousness of God revealed, the death and resurrection of Christ, the Spirit's work, the mystery of election. It is dense, vertical theology. It's the kind of stuff that makes your head spin. And then you hit 12.1, therefore, and you descend into the Valley of Ethics.
But I want to push on this. Is it just a generic transition like, okay, thanks for coming to the lecture, now here's your homework assignment? Because I feel like that's how we often read it. Section A is done, Section B begins.
No, and this is where Thomas Schreiner is really helpful. He argues that this, therefore, isn't just looking back at the doxology in chapter 11, the depth of the riches poem that ends the previous section. He says it reaches all the way back to Romans 1.16.
Wow.
Yeah, he sees the scope of this inference as covering the entire gospel argument.
That's a massive reach. So when Paul says therefore, he essentially means because the righteous shall live by faith, therefore present your bodies.
Exactly. Because all have sinned and fallen short, therefore present your bodies. Because there is now no condemnation for those in Christ Jesus, therefore present your bodies. Because Israel has been hardened in part until the fullness of the Gentiles comes in, therefore present your bodies. The ethics are built on the entire theological edifice.
Douglas Moo makes a critical point here about this indicative imperative dynamic, doesn't he? I feel like this is the heartbeat of Reformed ethics.
It is. Moo really sharpens this. He insists that this isn't a second step for Christians. It's not like you get saved and then a few years years later, if you're really serious, you decide to opt in to the obedience package. Or like you buy the base model of Christianity and Romans 12 is the sport package upgrade. Moo argues that obedience is the organic outflow of the gospel.
It's cause and effect. You literally can't have one without the other.
It is deliverance from the power of sin, which Paul talked about back in chapter 6, now being applied to daily life. You cannot have the theology of chapters 1 through 11 without the ethics of chapters 12 through 16. If you try to have the ethics without the theology,
you just end up with legalism.
Right. You have rule following, you have the Pharisees, and if you try to have the theology without the ethics, you have cheap grace. You have intellectual assent without life change that therefore binds them together inextricably.
Before we get into the verse by verse, let's look at how the chapter itself is built. Because when you read it, the texture changes. It feels totally different.
It feels very different. Beverly Gaventa points this out brilliantly. If you've just slogged through Romans 9, 10, and 11, your brain is tired. Paul has been doing this convoluted, tortured logic about Israel, hardening, mercy, olive trees, grafting in, cutting off. It is complex argumentation. It's like reading a legal brief mixed with a prophecy. And then you hit chapter 12, and the tone shifts completely.
It becomes staccato.
Yes. Punchy imperatives. Hate what is evil. Cling to what is good. Be devoted to one another. It's a refreshing change of pace for the Roman auditors. It wakes you up. The structure is essentially a thesis statement in verses 1 and 2, total dedication. Then verses 3 through 8 apply that thesis to the church humility and gifts. And then verses 9 through 21 apply it to the wider world, love and ethics.
So it's thesis, church, world.
That's the flow. It expands outward. It starts with your body, moves to the body of believers, and then moves to the body politic of the world.
Okay, let's introduce our guides a bit more formally before we let them loose on the text. We call this commentary DNA. Who exactly are we dealing with?
First up, Douglas J. Moo, writing for the NICNT series. Moo is Reformed evangelical. His lens is very much the New Covenant. He sees the renewed mind in this chapter as the replacement for the Torah. For Moo, the Christian isn't looking at a law code anymore. They were looking at a transformed way of thinking.
And methodology-wise.
He's pastoral, but he's technically precise. He's often the guy mediating between extreme views, trying to find the sensible middle ground. If there's a crazy theory out there, Moo will acknowledge it, dismantle it politely, and bring you back to the text.
Mediator. Okay, who's next?
Thomas R. Schreiner from the BECNT series. He's Reformed and Baptist. If Moo is the mediator, Schreiner is the logician. He is obsessed with the structure of the argument. He loves the argument from lesser to greater.
He's the one always looking back at the Old Testament, right?
Always. He reads everything against an Old Testament backdrop. He is constantly looking at the Greek text and asking what Hebrew concept is echoing behind this. He wants to see the skeleton of the argument. He wants to know how the bones connect.
And finally, Beverly Roberts Gaventa.
Writing for the NTL,
Yeah.
She is our apocalyptic scholar. She reads from a mainline perspective, but her specific lens is cosmic power. When she reads Romans, she doesn't just see people making bad choices. She sees a war between the powers of sin and death. Capital S, capital D, and the power of God.
So she's looking at the macro spiritual warfare level.
Exactly. So for her, Romans 12 isn't just good advice. It's a battle strategy. It is liturgical warfare. She emphasizes that our bodies are weapons in a cosmic war.
I love that image. It changes the stakes immediately. It turns a devotional text into a briefing room. All right, let's get into the text itself. Romans 12.1. I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God. Let's stop right there at mercies.
The Greek is oiktermon.
Why is it plural? Is God just really, really nice multiple times?
That's the interpretive question. Schreiner jumps right in here with his Hebrew echoes. He points to the Hebrew word rahamim, which is related to the word for womb. It implies a womb love, a deep, deep compassion. And in Hebrew, the plural often suggests intensity or manifold greatness. So it's the manifold mercies of God. It's not just one isolated act of kindness. It is an ocean of compassion.
So it's a quantity of quality.
Right. But Gaventa, true to form, connects it back to the narrative Paul just finished. She says this isn't just generic kindness. This connects back to the specific mercy shown to Gentiles and Jews in chapter 11. Remember, God consigned all to disobedience so that he might have mercy on all. It is the specific salvation history he just described.
The mercy that grafted the Gentiles into the olive tree.
Yes, and the mercy that promises to restore Israel.
So the basis of the appeal isn't just God is nice. It's Look at this incredible, complex, millennia-spanning rescue mission God just pulled off. Now give him your bodies.
Yes, and let's talk about bodies, Samana.
Why bodies? Why not present your souls or present your hearts? Because that's how we usually talk in church. We talk about giving our hearts to Jesus.
Because Paul is anti-Gnostic before Gnosticism was even fully a thing. Gaventa is very strong on this. She says it's not souls. It is the physical, historical person. The body that was ruled by sin in chapter 6, the body that was the beachhead for the enemy, is now holy.
Think about that in the Roman context. The body was often seen as a prison for the soul, or just a piece of meat.
Right. Paul dignifies the body. He says your actual flesh and blood is the site of worship.
Mu agrees here, doesn't he?
He does. He warns against reducing worship to just an inner attitude. We love to do that in the modern world. Oh, I worship God in my heart. Paul says, no, worship him with your hands, your feet, your mouth, your sexuality, your eating habits. It is the whole person. If your body isn't involved, you aren't worshiping. You can't be a living sacrifice in theory. You have to actually show up physically.
Now we get to the battleground of the verse. The end of verse 1 calls this sacrifice your logikos latria.
Oh, this is a huge dispute. This is where the commentators really pull out the knives. How do you translate logikos?
It's all over the map. The King James says reasonable service. The NIV says true and proper worship. Others say spiritual worship. The translators are clearly struggling to pin this one down.
They are struggling because the word is loaded. We're going to dive deep into this specific debate later in our commentary showdown, but just to flag it now, Schreiner leans heavily into the philosophical background, arguing for rational worship. Mu leans into the redemptive historical contrast, arguing for spiritual worship. And Gaventa completely rejects the rational framework, arguing for what she calls fitting worship.
It's a perfect example of how your theological lens dictates your translation. We'll circle back to that brawl in a minute. Let's look at verse 2. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind.
Here is where the Greek gets really interesting. The words are sikbibetizo for conformed and metamorpho for transformed.
I remember hearing a sermon once that said conformed refers to an outward fleeting change like wearing a costume, and transformed refers to an inner substantial change. Is there any linguistic merit to that?
That was actually the standard view for a long time. Scholars used to obsess over the root words, schema versus morphe. They'd say schema is the external variation and morphe is the essential nature. But Mu looks at that and says, nah. He just rejects it entirely.
He says it's linguistically weak. Paul uses these roots in other places where that distinction doesn't hold up at all. Mu argues the difference isn't the type of change, as if one is fake and one is real, but the source of the change.
What are the two sources?
Or conformed, the source is this age, the pressure coming from the outside world. For transformed, the source is the renewing of the mind by the Spirit. So it's not about deep versus shallow, it's about outside-in pressure versus inside-out power.
Gaventa must jump all over this age, right? That's her apocalyptic vocabulary. Absolutely. This is her absolute wheelhouse. She says, do not be shaped by this age is an apocalyptic command. She connects this age to the anti-God powers. It's not just, don't follow fashion trends. It is, do not let the cosmic powers of death squeeze you into their mold. She sees a malevolent agency behind this age. It actively wants to crush you into its shape.
Which brings us to the renewed mind. This seems to be the engine of the entire chapter.
It is the engine of Christian ethics. Mu makes a profound point here. He says that Christians do not have a law code. We don't have a Talmud or a Leviticus for the new covenant. We don't have a list of do's and don'ts that covers every conceivable situation. We have a reprogrammed moral consciousness.
A reprogrammed moral consciousness? That sounds almost sci-fi.
It's deeply spiritual. It's practical reason driven by the Spirit. This is what allows a Christian to approve, that's the word dokimazo, which means to test and approve what God's will is. We don't look up the rule in a book. We discern the will in the moment. We have a transformed instinct that knows what is good, pleasing, and perfect in real time.
So it's like the difference between playing sheet music and jazz improvisation. The law was sheet music. You play exactly what is written. If it's a C sharp, you play a C sharp. But the renewed mind is knowing the theory so well you can improvise in the key of God.
That is a perfect analogy, and Paul is saying, learn the key. You have to have the mind of Christ so deeply embedded that when you encounter a new ethical dilemma, one that isn't written in the Bible, like AI ethics or genetic engineering or how to navigate social media bullying, you can improvise the melody that fits God's character.
Moving to verse 3, we shift from the vertical me and God to the horizontal me in the church. For by the grace given to me, I say to everyone among you not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think.
Humility, the foundational Christian virtue. Paul starts the community section here because without humility, community is literally impossible.
But to think with sober judgment, each according to the measure of faith that God has assigned. Let's talk about measure of faith. Metron pisteos. This is tricky. Is it a bucket of faith? Does God give me a gallon and you a pint?
That's exactly how I usually hear it taught. I just don't have enough faith to heal this person, or she has so much faith she's a spiritual giant.
Right. It inadvertently creates a class system in the church.
Schreiner and Moo both push back hard on that interpretation. Schreiner sees it as a standard. We measure ourselves against the standard of the gospel, or the standard of faith itself. Moo agrees, specifically saying we check ourselves against saving faith. It's not about quantity of conviction like, I believe 50% hard. It's about the fact that we are all saved by the same faith.
But Gaventa takes a grammatical risk here that I find really compelling.
She does. She reads it as a genitive of apposition.